The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Amara Johnson walked home from school. The 16-year-old adjusted her backpack, heavy with textbooks after another successful debate team practice. Her mind buzzed with arguments and counterpoints she'd practiced for the upcoming regional competition. Coach had said her closing statement was the strongest in the group, and that little boost of confidence made her steps lighter, despite the weight on her shoulders. The neighborhood streets were quiet at this hour, just after 5 p.m. on a Thursday. Most people were still at work or just beginning their commute home. Amara took her usual route, past the old corner store with its faded awning, then right at the community garden that the neighborhood association had planted last spring. She was just 2 blocks from home when the police cruiser rolled slowly alongside her. At first, Amara didn't think much of it. Police patrolled the area regularly and she had nothing to worry about. She kept walking, mentally rehearsing her debate points. The cruiser's engine hummed as it matched her pace. When the officer inside rolled down his window, Amara finally looked over. "Excuse me, miss," the officer called out. His name tag read Daniels. "Can I have a word with you?" Amara stopped, clutching the straps of her backpack. "Yes, officer. Is something wrong?" Officer Daniels stepped out of his vehicle, one hand resting casually near his belt. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" "I'm just walking home from school," Amara replied, her voice steady even as her heart began to beat a little faster. "I had debate team practice. I live just 2 blocks from here on Maple Street." The officer looked her up and down, taking in her school uniform, navy blue pants and a white button-up shirt with the Kennedy High School logo embroidered on the pocket. The debate team had gone overtime, and Amara was one of the last students to leave the building. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Officer Daniels said, his tone flat. "Someone matching your description was seen looking into car windows a few streets over." Amara blinked in surprise. "That wasn't me, sir. I've been at school until just now. I can show you my student ID." She reached slowly for the lanyard around her neck, pulling out the plastic card with her photo and school information. Officer Daniels barely glanced at it. "Why don't you put your backpack down and place your hands where I can see them?" he said. It wasn't a question. Across the street, an older woman walking her dog slowed down, watching the interaction with concern. A car driving by also slowed, the driver's eyes lingering on the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake," Amara said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I'm just walking home from school. My mom is expecting me. You can call her if you want." She carefully set her backpack down as instructed, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. Officer Daniels moved closer. "Turn around, please. Why? I haven't done anything wrong." Amara stood her ground, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm just trying to get home." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. The woman with the dog had crossed the street and stood at a respectful distance. A young man who had been washing his car in a nearby driveway set down his sponge and approached slowly. 2 teenagers on bikes stopped at the corner, pulling out their phones. "Turn around now," Officer Daniels repeated, his voice harder. "This is not a request." Amara felt tears threatening to form, but she blinked them back. Her parents had talked to her about situations like this. Stay calm, be respectful, but know your rights. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being detained?" "I've shown you my school ID. I'm just walking home from debate practice." Instead of answering, Officer Daniels reached for her shoulder and forcefully turned her around. "Hey," called the young man from the driveway. "What's going on?" "She's just a kid." "Please step back, sir," Officer Daniels called without looking away from Amara. "This is police business." More people were stopping now. A car pulled over and a middle-aged woman in professional attire stepped out, phone already recording. "I know that girl," she called out. "That's Amara Johnson. She volunteers at Westside Elementary where I work. I'm Mrs. Rivera, the principal there." Amara felt a rush of relief at seeing a familiar face. Mrs. Rivera had always been kind to her during her volunteer hours reading to the younger children. "Mrs. Rivera," Amara called. "Please call my mom." Officer Daniels ignored the growing crowd and pulled out his handcuffs. "Put your hands behind your back. Why are you handcuffing her?" someone in the crowd demanded. "What did she do?" "She matches the description of a suspect," Officer Daniels stated flatly. "What description?" Another voice called out. "Young and black? That's not a description, that's profiling." The crowd was growing larger and more vocal. Phones recorded from every angle as Officer Daniels placed the cold metal cuffs around Amara's wrists. She winced as they closed too tightly, biting into her skin. "Please," she said, her voice finally breaking. "Call my parents. Their numbers are in my phone in my backpack." "I didn't do anything wrong." Mrs. Rivera pushed closer, still recording. "Officer, I can vouch for this young woman's character. She's an honor student and volunteers 3 days a week helping children learn to read. Whatever you think she did, I can assure you that you have the wrong person." Other voices joined in. "This is ridiculous. She's wearing a school uniform." "Someone call the station." A city bus slowed as it passed, passengers pressing their faces to the windows. The driver honked once briefly, drawing even more attention to the scene. Officer Daniels finally seemed to register the growing crowd and the many cameras pointed in his direction. His jaw tightened as he guided Amara toward his cruiser. "I'm detaining her for questioning," he announced to the crowd. "Please disperse and go about your business." "Not a chance," said an older man stepping forward from the growing crowd. He was well dressed in a sweater vest and wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Thomas Washington, retired judge from the county court." "Young lady, you don't have to say anything." "Officer, I'd like to know the specific reason for this detention and why you felt handcuffs were necessary for a minor in a school uniform." Officer Daniels hesitated, his hand on the door of his cruiser. "She matches the description." "What description?" Judge Washington interrupted. "Be specific, please. Height, weight, clothing, or just her race? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a textbook case of racial profiling." The crowd murmured in agreement. Someone in the back shouted, "Take those cuffs off her!" Amara stood by the police car, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks despite her efforts to remain composed. All she had wanted was to get home and tell her parents about her successful debate practice. Now she was handcuffed in front of neighbors and strangers, treated like a criminal for simply walking home. "My debate coach is still at school," she said, her voice small but clear. "Mr. Patterson, please, someone call him." As if on cue, a car screeched to a halt at the edge of the crowd. A tall man in a tweed jacket pushed his way through. "Amara," he called out. "What's happening here?" "I got a text from Kelly saying you were being arrested." "Mr. Patterson," Amara called back, relief washing over her. "I don't know what's happening. I was just walking home and—" "Step back, sir," Officer Daniels interrupted, positioning himself between Amara and her teacher. Mr. Patterson straightened to his full height, his expression stern. "I'm the student's teacher. She was in my classroom until 4:45 this afternoon for debate team practice, which I supervised. Whatever you think she's done, you're mistaken." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police department's community liaison right now. I have her on speed dial after the community outreach program she ran at our school last month." The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now, filling the sidewalk and spilling into the street. Cars slowed as they passed, some stopping completely. The energy was tense but controlled, a community witnessing what they perceived as injustice and standing against it, not with violence but with presence and documentation. Officer Daniels looked increasingly uncomfortable as he glanced from face to face in the crowd, at the many phones recording his every move, at the respected community members stepping forward to vouch for Amara. "I'm just following protocol," he said, though his voice lacked conviction now. "We had a report." "Then follow proper protocol," Judge Washington countered, "which includes identifying yourself fully, explaining the reason for detention, and considering the totality of circumstances, including the fact that multiple community members, including a school principal and a teacher, can vouch for this young woman's whereabouts and character." Mrs. Rivera had moved to stand beside Amara, her phone still recording but her free hand now resting supportively on the girl's shoulder. "It's going to be okay, Amara. We're all here with you." In the distance, the wail of another siren approached. The crowd parted as a second police cruiser pulled up. A tall officer with lieutenant bars on his uniform stepped out, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. As Lieutenant Wilson approached, the crowd fell silent. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Lieutenant Wilson surveyed the scene with a calm but concerned expression. His 20 years on the force had taught him to read situations quickly. What he saw troubled him. A teenage girl in a school uniform standing in handcuffs beside Officer Daniels, surrounded by an increasingly upset crowd of community members. "What's going on here, Officer Daniels?" Lieutenant Wilson asked, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the crowd. Before Officer Daniels could answer, several voices spoke up at once. Lieutenant Wilson held up his hand. "One at a time, please," he said firmly but without hostility. "First, I need to hear from the officer on scene." Officer Daniels straightened his posture. "Sir, I received a call about suspicious activity in the area. Someone looking into car windows on Birch Street. The description matched this individual, so I stopped her for questioning. She became uncooperative." "That's not true," Amara protested, her voice breaking. "I showed him my school ID and explained I was walking home from debate practice." "I never—" "Let's all take a breath," Lieutenant Wilson interrupted gently. He turned to Amara. "Young lady, what's your name?" "Amara Johnson, sir," she replied, trying to maintain her composure despite the handcuffs digging into her wrists. "I'm 16 years old. I attend Kennedy High School. I was just walking home from debate team practice when Officer Daniels stopped me." Lieutenant Wilson nodded. "And these people?" He gestured to Mrs. Rivera, Mr. Patterson, and Judge Washington, who stood closest to Amara. Mrs. Rivera stepped forward. "I'm Elena Rivera, principal at Westside Elementary. Amara volunteers with our reading program 3 days a week. She's a wonderful role model for our younger students. And I'm Michael Patterson, her debate coach at Kennedy High," Mr. Patterson added. "Amara was in my classroom until 4:45 today. We were preparing for the regional competition next week. She's one of our top debaters." Judge Washington introduced himself next. "Thomas Washington, retired county judge. I happened to be walking by when I saw this officer handcuffing a schoolgirl. I stopped because what I witnessed appeared to be a clear violation of proper police procedure." The crowd had grown quieter, watching the exchange intently. Phones still recorded from every angle as Lieutenant Wilson processed the information. He turned back to Officer Daniels. "What was the specific description you were given for the suspect on Birch Street?" Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Young black female, approximately 16 to 20 years old, wearing dark pants." A collective murmur of disbelief rose from the crowd. "That's it?" Lieutenant Wilson asked, his expression hardening. "Dark pants? Do you realize how many people that could describe? Was there any mention of a school uniform in that description?" "No, sir," Officer Daniels admitted. "Any mention of a backpack full of books? Any reported weapons or dangerous behavior?" "No, sir." Lieutenant Wilson took a deep breath, then turned to Amara. "Miss Johnson, I apologize for this situation." "Officer Daniels, remove those handcuffs immediately." Officer Daniels hesitated. "Sir, department protocol states—" "I'm giving you a direct order, officer," Lieutenant Wilson said, his voice carrying a note of finality that silenced further protest. "Remove the handcuffs now." The crowd watched as Officer Daniels reluctantly took out his key and unlocked the handcuffs. Amara brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists where the metal had dug into her skin, leaving angry red marks. "Thank you," she whispered, relief washing over her face. Lieutenant Wilson turned to address the crowd. "Folks, I appreciate your concern for this young lady. It speaks well of this community that so many of you stopped to make sure she was treated fairly. I can assure you that this incident will be thoroughly reviewed." He turned back to Amara. "Miss Johnson, can I give you a ride home? I'd like to speak with your parents and explain what happened here today." "My mom is probably worried sick by now," Amara said, checking the time on her phone. "I was supposed to be home over half an hour ago." Mrs. Rivera stepped forward. "I've already called her, Amara. She's on her way." As if on cue, a car sped around the corner and screeched to a halt at the edge of the crowd. A woman in scrubs pushed her way through, her face tight with worry. "Amara," she called out, rushing forward to wrap her daughter in a tight embrace. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" "Mom," Amara said, tears flowing freely now as she collapsed into her mother's arms. The strength she had been holding on to finally gave way in the safety of her mother's presence. Mrs. Johnson looked around at the scene. The police cars, the crowd with their phones, her daughter's tear-streaked face, and her expression hardened. "Who's in charge here?" she demanded. Lieutenant Wilson stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Wilson. There's been an unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Mrs. Johnson's voice was controlled but vibrating with anger. "My daughter is in tears, coming home late from school, surrounded by police. That's not a misunderstanding. That's something else entirely." Judge Washington moved closer. "Mrs. Johnson, I witnessed most of what happened here. Your daughter conducted herself with remarkable poise under very difficult circumstances. You should be proud." I am proud, Mrs. Johnson said, keeping an arm around Amara's shoulders. But I'm also furious. On what grounds was my daughter detained? Lieutenant Wilson explained the situation as Officer Daniels stood silently by, his expression unreadable. A vague description? Mrs. Johnson said when he finished. Dark pants? That's enough to handcuff a child in a school uniform? No, ma'am, it is not, Lieutenant Wilson stated firmly. And that will be addressed. Officer Daniels made an error in judgment today. Officer Daniels finally spoke up. With all due respect, sir, I was following. You were not following proper procedure, Lieutenant Wilson cut him off. Proper procedure includes assessing the totality of circumstances, which you failed to do. This young lady was clearly coming from school, identified herself, and had community members willing to vouch for her. Yet you escalated the situation unnecessarily. The crowd had begun to thin slightly, though many remained, still recording. The story was already spreading through social media, with local community groups sharing videos of the incident. Mr. Patterson approached Amara and her mother. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Michael Patterson, Amara's debate coach. I want you to know that the school will fully support Amara through this. And if you decide to take action, we'll stand behind you. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson said, her voice softening slightly. Right now, I just want to get my daughter home. Lieutenant Wilson nodded. I understand completely, but if you're willing, I'd like to come by later to discuss this further. The department has protocols against racial profiling, and what happened today appears to be a clear violation of those protocols. Mrs. Johnson nodded curtly. You can come by at 7. We live on Maple Street, number 1423. As Amara gathered her backpack, Mrs. Rivera approached and handed her a business card. Amara, if you need someone to talk to about this, please call me. And take tomorrow off from volunteering if you need to. The little ones will understand. Thank you, Mrs. Rivera, Amara said, managing a small smile. But I think I'd rather come in. The kids always make me feel better. The crowd parted as Mrs. Johnson led Amara to their car. People reached out to touch Amara's shoulder or arm as she passed, offering words of support. Stay strong, young sister. We've got your back. You handled yourself so well. Once in the car, Amara finally let out the full sob she'd been holding back. Her mother held her close, rocking her slightly as she would when Amara was a small child. It's okay, baby. Let it out. You're safe now. Back at the scene, Lieutenant Wilson was addressing Officer Daniels away from the dispersing crowd. Report to the station immediately. You're on administrative leave pending a full review of this incident. Sir, with all due respect, this is not a discussion, Officer Daniels. I've reviewed your body cam footage and what I saw does not align with department policy. You received a vague description and immediately jumped to conclusions. You failed to properly assess the situation or consider alternative explanations. Worst of all, you escalated a routine inquiry into a detention without proper cause. Officer Daniels' face flushed red. You're taking their side? After all the community complaints about car break-ins? This isn't about sides, Lieutenant Wilson replied firmly. It's about proper policing. That girl was clearly not breaking into cars. She was walking home from school, and you should have recognized that within seconds of speaking with her. As Officer Daniels reluctantly got into his cruiser, Judge Washington approached Lieutenant Wilson. I appreciate your swift action here today, Lieutenant, the retired judge said. But this isn't an isolated incident. There's a pattern that needs to be addressed. I know, Lieutenant Wilson admitted, and trust me, it will be. This incident was captured on multiple cameras, including Officer Daniels' body cam. There will be consequences. As the last of the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Rivera checked her phone. The videos were already gaining traction online. Local community groups were discussing organizing a meeting with the police department. Change was coming, sparked by one girl's wrongful detention in a community that refused to stand by silently. Back in their car, Mrs. Johnson looked at her daughter. Amara, I want you to know something. What happened today was wrong. It was unfair and it should never have happened. But you handled it with such dignity. And you weren't alone. The community showed up for you. Amara nodded, wiping away her tears. I kept thinking about what you and Dad always told me. Stay calm, know your rights, speak clearly. You did everything right, her mother assured her. And now we're going to make sure there are consequences. This won't just be swept under the rug. As they drove the short distance home, Amara looked out the window at her neighborhood, the place she'd always felt safe, until today. But despite the trauma of the afternoon, she felt something else too, The power of community, of people standing up for what's right. And somehow she knew that what happened next would matter not just for her, but for everyone. The Johnson family's modest two-story home on Maple Street was usually a place of peace and laughter. Tonight it buzzed with tension and activity. In the living room, Amara sat on the couch between her parents, her father's arm protectively around her shoulders while her mother held her hand. "I still can't believe this happened just 2 blocks from our house," Mr. Johnson said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He was still wearing his postal worker uniform, having rushed home when his wife called with the news. "You walk that route every day." "I know, Dad," Amara said quietly. "It doesn't feel real." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Mrs. Johnson went to answer it, returning with Lieutenant Wilson and another woman, a black woman in her 40s wearing a crisp pantsuit. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Amara," Lieutenant Wilson began. "Thank you for allowing me to come by. This is Diane Powell, our department's community relations officer. We wanted to speak with you about what happened today and the steps we're taking in response." Mr. Johnson stood, his posture stiff. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. Officer Powell." He gestured to the chairs across from the couch. "I want to know exactly what's going to happen to the officer who put hands on my daughter." Lieutenant Wilson nodded, understanding the father's anger. "Officer Daniels has been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. I've reviewed his body camera footage, which corroborates what Amara and the witnesses reported." "Administrative leave?" Mr. Johnson repeated. "So he gets a paid vacation while my daughter is traumatized." Officer Powell leaned forward. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but this is just the beginning of the process. The leave is standard procedure, but it's not the end of the matter. Based on what I've seen in the footage, there will be serious consequences." Amara, who had been quiet since their arrival, finally spoke. "Will he just go work at another police department? Is that how this ends?" The adults in the room exchanged glances, struck by the teenager's insight. "That's a fair question," Lieutenant Wilson admitted. "But in this case, I don't believe that will happen. The incident was witnessed by too many people, including a retired judge who has already filed a formal complaint. The body camera footage is clear. And frankly, this isn't Officer Daniels' first problem. There have been other complaints. Then why was he still on the force?" Mrs. Johnson demanded. Officer Powell sighed. "Previous complaints didn't have this level of evidence or witnesses, and our disciplinary procedures require a certain burden of proof. But this time is different." Mr. Johnson's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it, then looked up in surprise. "The video of what happened is all over social media. There's a community meeting being organized at the recreation center tomorrow night." Lieutenant Wilson nodded. "We know. Officer Powell and I will be there along with the chief. We want to address this head-on." "What about Amara?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "How do you plan to make this right for her?" Before either officer could respond, the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Johnson went to answer it and returned, followed by Mrs. Rivera and Mr. Patterson. "I hope we're not intruding," Mrs. Rivera said. "But we wanted to check on Amara, and we have some news that might help." Amara sat up straighter. "What news?" Mr. Patterson stepped forward. "The school board called an emergency meeting after seeing the videos. They've decided to launch a new student police dialogue program, and they want you to lead it, Amara, if you're willing." Amara blinked in surprise. "Me? Why?" "Because you handled yourself with remarkable composure and dignity today," Mrs. Rivera explained. "You demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership, qualities we try to instill in our students. The program would bring students together with police officers for regular discussions about community relations, mutual respect, and reform," Mr. Patterson continued. "Your experience would be invaluable in shaping this initiative." Amara looked at her parents, uncertainty in her eyes. "It's entirely your choice, sweetheart," her mother said. "No one would blame you if you wanted nothing to do with the police right now." Amara was quiet for a moment, considering. "If I did this, would Officer Daniels be part of it?" "Absolutely not," Lieutenant Wilson assured her. "But I would participate, as would Officer Powell and other officers who are committed to rebuilding community trust." The doorbell rang once more. This time it was Judge Washington, along with several other community members who had witnessed the incident. "Sorry to interrupt," the judge said, "but we've been talking with neighbors and local business owners. We've started a community oversight committee, and we'd like to present our recommendations at tomorrow's meeting. The Johnsons' living room was now filled with people, all focused on addressing what had happened and ensuring it never happened again. Amara looked around at the faces, neighbors, teachers, police officers, her parents, all there because of what had happened to her. "I'll do it," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. The room quieted. "I'll lead the student dialogue program," Amara clarified, "because this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Her father squeezed her shoulder, pride shining in his eyes despite his lingering anger. Lieutenant Wilson nodded. "Thank you, Amara. Your willingness to engage after what you experienced shows extraordinary character." The conversation continued as the group discussed plans for the community meeting, the oversight committee, and the student dialogue program. Outside, more neighbors arrived, bringing food and support for the Johnson family. What had begun as a traumatic incident was transforming into a catalyst for community action and police accountability. As the evening progressed, Amara's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support from classmates and friends who had seen the videos. The local news had picked up the story, and a reporter had requested an interview with Amara and her family. "You don't have to do that if you don't want to," her mother assured her. Amara thought about it, then shook her head. "No, I think I should. People need to hear what happened from me, not just see clips online." Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Amara sat at her desk trying to focus on homework. Her debate notes seemed trivial now compared to what she had experienced. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, seeing herself differently than she had that morning. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Both her parents entered, sitting on the edge of her bed. "How are you really doing, sweetheart?" her mother asked. Amara turned from her desk. I don't know, angry, scared, but also determined? Does that make sense?" Her father nodded. "Perfect sense. What happened to you today was wrong, but the response from the community, from your school, even from some of the police, that gives me hope. We want you to know how proud we are of you," her mother added. "Not just for how you handled yourself during the incident, but for your decision to be part of the solution. That takes real courage." Amara smiled weakly. "I keep thinking about what you always told me, Dad, about how change doesn't just happen, people make it happen." "That's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And sometimes it starts with one person standing their ground." "Which is exactly what you did," her mother added. "You stood your ground respectfully but firmly. You knew your rights and you didn't let fear silence you." Amara nodded, feeling stronger with her parents' support. "I'm nervous about tomorrow. The meeting, the news interview. We'll be right beside you," her father promised. "And so will a lot of other people from what we saw tonight." After her parents left, Amara turned to her laptop and began typing. If she was going to lead this student dialogue program, she needed to organize her thoughts. As a debater, she knew the power of a well-structured argument, of backing up passion with facts and clear reasoning. She created a document titled "Building Trust, a Student-Police Dialogue Framework," and began listing ideas. By midnight, she had drafted a preliminary outline for the program, including discussion topics, ground rules for respectful communication, and goals for measurable outcomes. As exhaustion finally overtook her, Amara saved her work and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would be challenging, but for the first time since Officer Daniels had handcuffed her, she felt a sense of purpose cutting through the fear and anger. The next morning, Amara woke to the sound of voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and descended to find her parents in the kitchen with Mrs. Rivera, Mr. Patterson, and several neighbors. On the table was a stack of handmade signs with messages like "Justice for Amara" and "Community Oversight Now." "What's all this?" she asked, surprised. Mrs. Rivera smiled. "We thought you might want some support for your walk to school today. A lot of people want to show that this community stands with you." Amara looked out the window and gasped. Lining the sidewalk in front of their house were dozens of people. Classmates, neighbors, teachers, even strangers who had seen the videos online. Some held signs, others simply stood in silent solidarity. "They've been gathering since sunrise," her father explained, his voice filled with emotion. "People want you to know you're not alone." Amara felt tears welling up again, but these were different from yesterday's tears. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling seen and supported by her community. As she stepped outside with her parents and teachers, the crowd erupted in applause. Someone started a chant. Amara leads, we follow. Amara speaks, we listen. Walking to school that day, surrounded by supporters, Amara realized that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't just punishment for the wrongdoer. It's the community coming together to protect its own and demand better. The karma that had struck Officer Daniels wasn't just his suspension or the investigation he faced. It was the awakening of an entire community determined to create lasting change. The community recreation center had never been so packed. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls, spilled into the hallway, and gathered outside where speakers had been set up so everyone could hear. The crowd was diverse, young and old, different races and backgrounds, all united by what had happened to Amara Johnson. At the front of the room sat a long table. On one side were Chief Rodriguez, Lieutenant Wilson, Officer Powell, and the mayor. On the other side sat Amara with her parents, Judge Washington, Mrs. Rivera, and Mr. Patterson. Between them was a single microphone on a stand. Chief Rodriguez opened the meeting. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to address the incident that occurred yesterday, involving Officer Daniels and Amara Johnson. Before we begin, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. What happened was wrong. It was a violation of our department policies, our training, and most importantly, it was a violation of the trust this community places in us. A murmur ran through the crowd. People had expected excuses or legal jargon, not a straightforward admission. Officer Daniels has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, the chief continued. But that's just the beginning. Lieutenant Wilson and Officer Powell have been working with Amara's family and community leaders to develop a comprehensive response. I'll let them explain further. Lieutenant Wilson took the microphone next. After reviewing all the evidence, including Officer Daniels' body camera footage and numerous civilian videos, we've determined that there was no justification for the stop or the subsequent handcuffing of Amara Johnson. The vague description he was working from, young black female in dark pants, was insufficient grounds for detention, especially given Amara's school uniform, backpack, and immediate identification as a student. He looked directly at Amara. On behalf of the department, I want to apologize to you, Amara. What happened to you should never happen to anyone, especially not a child walking home from school in their own neighborhood. The crowd applauded, and many called out in agreement. Officer Powell spoke next. Beyond addressing this specific incident, we recognize the need for systemic changes. We're implementing immediate additional training for all officers on implicit bias, proper detention procedures, and community relations. But training alone isn't enough. We need structural changes and community oversight. Judge Washington stood and approached the microphone. That's where our newly formed Community Oversight Committee comes in. We've drafted a proposal for an independent review board that would have real authority to investigate complaints against officers and recommend disciplinary action. The police department has agreed to work with us to implement this proposal. The mayor nodded. The city council will vote on this proposal next week, but I've already spoken with council members and there is strong support. A woman stood up from the audience. This all sounds good, but what about Officer Daniels? Will he just get a slap on the wrist? Chief Rodriguez returned to the microphone. The investigation will follow proper procedures, but I can tell you that, based on the evidence I've seen, Officer Daniels will face serious consequences. This isn't his first incident, but I promise you it will be his last with our department. The crowd erupted in applause. Next, Mrs. Rivera introduced the Student Police Dialogue Program, explaining how it would bring young people and officers together for regular discussions about mutual respect, community needs, and police reform. And we're honored that Amara has agreed to lead this initiative, she concluded, turning to Amara with a smile. All eyes in the room focused on Amara as she approached the microphone. She took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces. Just yesterday, she had been a regular high school student. Now she was standing before her community, about to address hundreds of people, including the police chief and the mayor. Thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. What happened to me yesterday was scary and unfair. But what's happened since then has been incredible. The way this community has come together, how quickly changes are being made. It shows what's possible when people stand up for what's right. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about why I was stopped. Officer Daniels said I matched a description, but the real reason was the color of my skin. We all know it, and we need to be honest about it. Black kids like me grow up being told we have to be extra careful around police, that we can't make the same mistakes other kids make because we might not get a second chance. The room was completely silent, everyone hanging on her words. That's not fair and it's not right, but I don't want what happened to me to just make people angry. I want it to lead to real change. That's why I agreed to lead the student dialogue program, because I believe most police officers want to do the right thing, and most young people want to feel safe in their communities. We need to talk to each other, really listen to each other to make that happen. Amara looked directly at Lieutenant Wilson and Officer Powell. I'm willing to work with you if you're willing to really hear us, not just me, but all the young people in this community who feel scared or targeted because of how they look. Lieutenant Wilson nodded solemnly. You have my word. Amara continued. Yesterday when I was handcuffed, I felt helpless and alone. But I wasn't alone for long. People stopped. They stood up for me. They recorded what was happening. They called out the injustice they were seeing. That's what community looks like. People looking out for each other, especially those who are vulnerable. The crowd burst into applause, many rising to their feet. Amara's parents watched from their seats, their faces shining with pride through their tears. As the meeting continued, more community members took turns at the microphone, sharing their own experiences and offering suggestions for reform. The police officials listened attentively, taking notes and responding respectfully to each speaker. By the end of the night, concrete plans had been established. The Oversight Committee would begin work immediately. The student dialogue program would launch the following week. Additional training for officers would start the next day, and a town hall meeting would be scheduled monthly to ensure continued communication between police and community members. As people began to file out, many stopped to shake Amara's hand or give her a hug. A local reporter approached her for an interview, which she gave thoughtfully, focusing on the positive changes that were coming, rather than dwelling on the trauma she had experienced. Outside the recreation center, Amara noticed a small group of teenagers about her age standing off to the side, watching her uncertainly. She excused herself from her parents and walked over to them. Hi, she said simply. A girl with braids twisted into a bun stepped forward. We just wanted to say, what you did in there was really brave. Standing up like that, talking to the police chief and everyone. Thanks, Amara replied, but I don't feel brave. I just felt like I had to say something. That's what makes it brave, said another girl. We've all had stuff happen, maybe not as bad as getting handcuffed, but being followed in stores, having people cross the street when they see us coming. But we usually just keep quiet about it. Amara nodded. I get it. It's easier to stay quiet, but maybe that's part of the problem. So this student dialogue thing, said a tall boy who had been hanging back. You really think it'll make a difference? You think the cops will actually listen to kids like us? Amara considered the question. I don't know for sure, but Lieutenant Wilson seems genuine, and if we don't try, nothing will change. So yeah, I think it's worth a shot. Would you guys want to be part of it? They exchanged glances, then the girl with the braids nodded. Yeah, we're in. As Amara exchanged phone numbers with her new allies, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Lieutenant Wilson. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but I wanted to let you know. We just received word that Officer Daniels has been suspended without pay pending the completion of the investigation. The police union would normally fight this, but given the overwhelming evidence, they've agreed to the suspension. Thank you for telling me, Amara said. That's good to hear. Lieutenant Wilson hesitated, then added, I also wanted to say off the record that your speech tonight was one of the most powerful things I've ever heard. 20 years on the force, and I learned more from listening to you for 5 minutes than I did in all my official training. Amara didn't quite know how to respond to that. Thank you, she said simply. No, Lieutenant Wilson replied. Thank you for being willing to work with us even after what happened. A lot of people in your position would just want to stay as far away from police as possible. I thought about that, Amara admitted, but then I realized the only way things get better is if people are willing to do the hard work of making them better. As Lieutenant Wilson walked away, Amara's new friends looked at her with newfound respect. Did the lieutenant just apologize to you? The tall boy asked in disbelief. Kind of, Amara said with a small smile. Things are changing. Slowly maybe, but they're changing. Later that night, as Amara got ready for bed, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it to see a headline. Officer who wrongfully detained teen suspended without pay. Department announces reforms. Below the headline was a photo of Amara speaking at the meeting, her expression determined and dignified. The caption read, Amara Johnson, 16, addresses community meeting after being wrongfully detained. Johnson will lead new student police dialogue program. Amara stared at the image for a long moment. Yesterday, she had been just another high school student, worried about debate competitions and homework. Today, she was leading a movement for change in her community. It was overwhelming but also empowering. She thought about Officer Daniels, now suspended and likely to lose his job. The karma that had struck him wasn't just about punishment. It was about justice, accountability, and most importantly, change. What had begun as a traumatic experience was transforming into something positive, not just for Amara but for her entire community. As she drifted off to sleep, Amara felt something she hadn't expected to feel so soon after her ordeal. Hope. Real, tangible hope that things could get better, and that she could be part of making that happen. 3 months had passed since that life-changing afternoon when Amara was wrongfully handcuffed just blocks from her home. Summer had given way to fall, and the leaves on Maple Street were turning golden and red. Amara sat in the community center meeting room, watching as teenagers and police officers filed in for the 12th session of the Student Police Dialogue Program. What had begun as a small initiative now included 30 students from various high schools across the district and 15 police officers who volunteered their time. Today's session was special. Not only was the police chief attending, but also a representative from the mayor's office and a reporter from the local newspaper. Everyone, find your seats please, Amara called out, her voice confident in a way it hadn't been 3 months ago. We've got a lot to cover today. The room quieted as people took their places in the circle of chairs. There were no tables, no barriers between participants. That had been Amara's idea from the beginning. Face to face, eye to eye, human to human. Before we get started with today's topic, I thought we should take a moment to reflect on how far we've come since we started these dialogues. Amara began. Officer Powell, would you like to share some of the changes that have been implemented in the department? Officer Powell nodded and stood. Thanks to input from all of you, we've completely revamped our training on community engagement. Every officer now undergoes extensive bias training, not just once but quarterly. Our detention protocols have been rewritten to require specific, detailed descriptions before an officer can detain someone. Young black person in dark clothes would never be sufficient grounds anymore. She smiled at Amara before continuing. Most importantly, we've implemented the ride-along program that many of you suggested. Officers now regularly invite community members, especially young people, to ride along with them during a shift to see what policing actually looks like from the inside. And officers spend time in community centers, schools, and neighborhood events when they're not on duty, getting to know the people they serve in positive settings. A young officer named Harris raised his hand. I just want to add that those ride-alongs and community events, they've changed how I approach my job every day. When you know people's names, their stories, it makes a difference in how you interact, even in tense situations. Amara nodded. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Tyler, do you want to share your perspective as a student? A tall boy with glasses stood up. When we started this program, I'm not gonna lie, I was skeptical. I didn't think anything would really change. But I've noticed a difference in my neighborhood. The officers who patrol there, they wave, they know our names. Last week, Officer Chen even showed up to my little brother's basketball game just to cheer him on. That kind of stuff matters. As the discussion continued, Amara felt a deep sense of pride in what they had accomplished. The program wasn't perfect. There had been heated arguments, painful stories shared, and moments when it seemed like the gulf between teenagers and police was too wide to bridge. But they had persisted, pushing through the difficult conversations to find common ground. Chief Rodriguez took his turn to speak. I have some news to share with all of you. The Community Oversight Board that was established after Amara's incident has completed its investigation into Officer Daniels' conduct. Based on their findings and recommendations, Officer Daniels has been officially terminated from the department. A murmur ran through the room. Everyone knew this had been coming, but hearing it confirmed still carried weight. Additionally, the chief continued, the board reviewed 5 years of his previous stops and arrests and found a clear pattern of racial bias. As a result, several past cases are being reviewed by the district attorney's office. This kind of accountability wouldn't have happened without what you all started here. The representative from the mayor's office, a woman named Ms. Chen, spoke next. The mayor wanted me to tell you that your program is being studied as a model for other cities. 3 neighboring districts have already reached out to learn how they can implement similar initiatives. What began in response to one incident has sparked regional change. Amara felt a hand squeeze her shoulder. Lieutenant Wilson, who had become one of her strongest allies over the past months. None of this would have happened without you, Amara, he said quietly. She shook her head. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who stopped that day to record and speak up. It was Judge Washington filing that formal complaint. It was Mrs. Rivera and Mr. Patterson standing by me. It was my parents teaching me to know my rights. And it was officers like you, who were willing to admit when something was wrong and work to fix it. After the session ended, Amara found herself speaking with the newspaper reporter. Looking back on everything that's happened since that day, how do you feel about it now? The reporter asked. Amara considered the question carefully. I still think about that afternoon a lot. For a while, I had nightmares about it. I was angry and hurt and scared. But then I saw how my community responded not just with outrage but with action. And I realized that what happened to me could either be just another sad story that fades from the news, or it could be the beginning of real change. I chose to make it about change. The reporter nodded, taking notes. And Officer Daniels? How do you feel about his termination? It's not about revenge, Amara said firmly. It's about accountability. Officer Daniels didn't just make one mistake with me. He had a pattern of treating people differently based on their race. That kind of behavior has no place in policing. So yes, I think the right decision was made. But more importantly, I'm glad the department is making changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Later that evening, Amara arrived home to find her parents hosting a small gathering. Mrs. Rivera, Mr. Patterson, Judge Washington, Lieutenant Wilson, and several neighbors were there, along with a few of Amara's friends from the dialogue program. Surprise, her mother called as she entered. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Amara asked, confused. Her father beamed with pride. We just got the call. You've been awarded the Young Community Leader Scholarship from State University. Full tuition, Amara. Amara's hand flew to her mouth in shock. She had applied for the competitive scholarship months ago, writing her essay about the Student Police Dialogue program and her vision for community-based solutions to systemic problems. That's amazing, she managed to say as the news sank in. I can't believe it. Believe it, Judge Washington said with a smile. The committee was impressed by not just what you wrote, but what you've actually accomplished. They said your application showed extraordinary leadership and commitment to positive change. As congratulations poured in from everyone in the room, Amara felt overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just 3 months. From a terrifying moment of injustice had grown opportunities and connections she never would have imagined. Mrs. Rivera handed her an envelope. This came for you today at the school. I thought you might want to open it here, with everyone who's been on this journey with you. Amara opened the envelope to find a formal invitation. The Governor's Youth Leadership Summit, she read aloud. They want me to be a keynote speaker about community policing reforms? Lieutenant Wilson nodded. The Governor's office reached out to me last week asking about your program. They want to implement something similar statewide, and they want to hear directly from you about how it works. As the evening continued, Amara found a quiet moment to step outside onto the porch. The autumn air was crisp and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about how different things might have been if people hadn't stopped that day to witness and record what was happening to her. If Lieutenant Wilson hadn't arrived when he did. If her community hadn't rallied around her. The door opened behind her and her father joined her on the porch. Penny, for your thoughts? He asked softly. I was just thinking about how quickly everything can change, Amara replied. 3 months ago, I was just a regular high school student worried about debate team and college applications. Now I'm speaking at the Governor's Summit and running a program that's being copied by other cities. Her father nodded. Life can change in an instant, sometimes for worse, sometimes for better. What matters is how we respond to those changes. I keep thinking about karma, Amara admitted. How what Officer Daniels did came back around so quickly. But it wasn't just bad karma for him. It was good karma too, for the community, for the police department, even for me in some ways. Out of something terrible came all this positive change. That's wisdom beyond your years, her father said, putting an arm around her shoulders, finding the light even in dark moments. Inside, the phone rang and her mother called out the door. Amara, it's the state senator's office. They want to talk to you about testifying for the new police reform bill. Amara and her father exchanged a look and laughed. No rest for community leaders, he teased. I wouldn't have it any other way, Amara replied, realizing she meant it. The path she was on wasn't one she had chosen. It had chosen her in those frightening moments when metal handcuffs bit into her wrists. But she had transformed that moment of powerlessness into something meaningful and lasting. As she headed back inside to take the call, Amara thought about all the other young people who had experienced similar injustices, but didn't have a community to stand up for them, or a platform to speak from afterward. She was determined to use her voice for them too. The instant karma that had struck that day hadn't just been about Officer Daniels facing consequences for his actions. It had been about a community awakening to its own power, about systems beginning to change, about a young girl discovering her capacity to lead. In the end, the handcuffs that had been meant to restrain Amara had instead unleashed something unstoppable, a movement for justice that would continue to grow long after the headlines faded, creating ripples of change that would touch countless lives.